So this is a short talk to go with the week 4 assignment through the Stanford University online practice-based research in the arts course. A mouthful, I know. Essentially what has happened is that I went to hand this assignment in a day after the fact, or a day after the due date, and unfortunately I didn't realize that I couldn't hand it in late. So I've effectively missed this assignment and I'm submitting it as a journal entry instead. Along with this, I've provided some video footage of this morning's experimentation and practice in various concepts in swordsmanship. The primary subject that my research project is on is the Japanese practice of sword drawing and fighting. This goes by many terms, be it Bato Jutsu, Batodo, Iaido, Iaijutsu, Nukitsuki, Koshimoari, the list goes on. And this has changed all through history. So the subject of this particular assignment, Phenomenology, is fairly new to me. The practice itself is far from new. In fact, this has been a major focus of my own practice for several years now. It's very interesting to have a name to it because now that gives me all sorts of leads to pursue. So unfortunately, I'm not very good at listening to and understanding or internalizing people's verbal explanations regarding highly conceptualized or abstract thought. So for the most part, Miss Susan Causel's lecture, although brilliant and insightful and gave me many leads all throughout it, I've had to listen to it 5 or 6 times. I made an MP3 and just listened to it on my way to and from work. And and yeah, so it's been very difficult for me to fully grasp and be able to focus on. However, since taking notes and minutes on this, I've managed to extract a lot of things that have given me many leads through my research, which unfortunately very little of my research actually makes it onto the Stanford University site, but I do what I can. The rest of it's either on my Facebook page or my personal blog at CMARA.ca. So, without further ado, on to the subject. I found it very interesting that Ms. Causel provided what was dubbed the unhelpful divides. The term is unbelievably fitting, as I've had to deal with this all through my own practice, and frankly, Japanese swordsmen and various forms of martial arts and other artistic expressions in Japan have had to struggle with this since the beginning. The first one, theory versus practice, is just something that's been around since the beginning. Whereas in swordsmanship, especially in the stuff that I'm dealing with in this video, there's a tendency for there to be a theoretical thought, whether it be a theory of a physical performance or a theory of certain internalized feelings on the given techniques. There always seems to be a rough divide between the theory and the actual performance of it. Accordingly, many of these techniques are named after the feelings of the technique, and the names come after the performance of the technique. Form follows the function, as they say. And so the names of the techniques actually allude to the theory that the founder or the inventor brought to the practice, and the techniques themselves are a sort of expression or a sliver from the original concept. In this case, it ends up being the practitioner, especially nowadays, primary goal to unite the theory and the practice of any given technique. I could have done this full 10 weeks on a single technique and still not run out of stuff. However, I chose 5 techniques simply for the sake of avoiding monotony in my own practice and performance. But yeah, so basically you'll be taught a technique and you practice and practice and practice until it's ingrained. However, you're still stuck with the technique. Now, the Japanese have a concept called shuhari, and it basically means that you learn something, you master it to the point where you don't have to think about it, and then you forget it or you discard it. That is to say, you discard the original form. So you're learning a technique, you figure it out, you learn it, you implement it, you play with it, you explore it, you come to master it, you come to get to the point where you can perform it, against one person, against many people, in a prone position, on horseback, with weapons, without weapons, in elements of surprise, so on and so forth. And then you basically have to abstract that and extrapolate it to the point where it no longer looks like the original technique. So this is where it starts to return back to the original theory as opposed to just being a simple technique, skill, or practice. And this is why in this video, even though I have 5 primary techniques that I chose for this course, very few of them make an explicit appearance. Whilst throughout the entire thing, every movement there is extrapolated from those 5 techniques. So this is something that normally would take me years to work with on any 1 or 2 techniques. However, I've been dealing with a few of these for quite some time and thinking about the others off and on throughout the years. So in any case, that was the first unhelpful divide there. The second one, mind and body, this is kind of a given, or at the very least quite cliche in the martial arts, in that you always hear about the mind, spirit, and body, or some form of trinity like that. Well, in the case of mind and body, they've got this term called Shintai Chijo, which means the mind and body are unified, or the mind and body become all things. And yeah, so one of the primary goals in performing these various techniques is to thin that divide between the mind and body, to thin the latency between thinking of something and performing it, to basically start shifting into an intuitive state where you don't have to think about what you have to do in that situation. You find yourself doing what's appropriate, or what you feel is appropriate, and this is very much an emphasis on feeling as opposed to intellectual analysis, which is something you can't do in a state of emergency. It isn't something you get the opportunity to do when you find bullets being fired at you or weapons being thrown. This is something that basically you have to unconsciously and intuitively react to in an appropriate way. And just to let your body flinch out of the way isn't quite enough. It has to be a directed flinch. That is to say, conditioned to the point where you're what's commonly called the fight or flight reaction, or fight or flight reflex, is not put aside, not given into, but conditioned. So you shape what your flinch reflex is to be. So that's kind of something that happens in the practice, and this comes through, as they like to say, 10,000 hours of practice or 10,000 repetitions or what have you, where the nervous system starts to memorize the movements, or memorize the reaction, memorize the interpretation of the situation. Yes. Now, in the case of the final unhelpful divide here, solitary versus shared, this is obviously something that the Japanese are downright legendary for. It's a very highly social environment where transmission was everything from master to pupil to father to son. And it's been around for a long time. It's a very highly refined science in this sense. So it's something that one has to deal with when practicing like this. They have to figure out how to transmit these concepts and ideas to the next generation.